Ric Grenell's joining us now. He's our senior advisor for national security and foreign policy. But Rick, you had tweeted out, he said Trump would start World War III, and he literally made world peace. We talk about that a lot on this broadcast, that we've now come to this period where, January 6th, and focusing on that, when we've got war in Europe, when we have potentially this Taiwan issue, we're worried about China, we're worried about baby formula, like we were talking about on Friday. We're now relying on foreign aid, like we talked about on the show Friday. So this idea, this attack on conservatives, but we do feel, Rick, that it is a heightened attack this week, trying to make something out of this primetime hearing.
Look, I want to make one thing very clear about January 6th. Within hours of individuals breaking into the Capitol and committing vandalism, me and many other Republicans were very clear to say, find each individual who's committing vandalism and arrest them. This is unacceptable. And by the way, many Republicans were saying this the previous summer before, when Seattle and Portland and Minneapolis and Chicago were all attacked by BLM. There's a difference between Republicans and Democrats on January 6th in that Republicans generally condemned both sides of the violence whenever it happened. Democrats didn't. Democrats were totally silent when it came to BLM. I'm so tired of them playing one side in Washington, D.C. We didn't have nightly hearings when it came to all of the BLM attacks and people killed and properties damaged. We didn't hear much about that. We didn't see DOJ going after those individuals. But we do see that when it comes to January 6th. I'll say it again, and I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. Whenever we see violence or vandalism, I don't care who did it, you should arrest them.
Yep.
And we shouldn't play politics like the left is doing.
But, Rick, you said we shouldn't play politics, but here's the reality of what's just happened. With what they're saying now and what they're leaking out from the committee, it's gone from, well, we'll let you know what happened on January 6th in the buildup, and they're going to have this, show, so to speak, on Thursday and Friday. The problem is what they've already done is started moving the ball, and they're moving the ball by doing this. What we really need to be talking about is getting rid of the Electoral College. What we really need to talk about is corrections in the Electoral Count Act. What we really need to talk about is nationalizing voter registration, even though the Constitution rests that authority with the states. So they've already showed their hand on where they're moving the ball here.
Look, I think that it's really important that Republicans go on the offense here. Mailing ballots to individuals on a voter list creates all sorts of chaos because people get multiple ballots. And we all know that. You see them everywhere. You're getting multiple ballots. They're trying to get people to vote more than once by flooding the zone. What we should do is we should go back to paper ballots. We should go back to one-day voting. And we should have very limited absentee ballots. You should have to request it, and you should have to have a good reason. Otherwise, let's show up and let's produce an ID. And I think that every state should require an ID. If you are against a voter ID, it means you're cheating. You're trying to cheat.
I agree. And Rick, I want to go back to some of the foreign policy implications of this. Two things. One, we're seeing the whole world now. You got South Korea and the U.S. launching missiles in response to North Korea missile tests yesterday. We're seeing, of course, what's happened to Ukraine and Russia, China and Taiwan. These issues. It just seems like while we are, again, focusing on these issues at home, and some, are very important, like the inflation, but others, like this committee hearing, it's kind of like ignoring what's happening around the world while they're all taking all this primetime space up. Because I think that our standing in the world has been so diminished that every country who doesn't like us is testing the waters on how far they can go in whether it's provocations in their own region or, testing ballistic missiles.
Look, I'm going to have a piece up later this week on aclj.org talking about how we are having to receive foreign aid, the United States, under the Biden administration. It's really outrageous, and this continues to happen. I'm so glad you showed that tweet that I put out, which has really taken fire, because they told us that Donald Trump would cause World War III, and the opposite has happened. Joe Biden is causing World War III. Donald Trump actually brought us the Abraham Accords. He brought us world peace. And while Washington, D.C. can't say it, We know the truth. The world was so much better off with Donald Trump in charge. It was more peaceful, and countries were signing peace accords. That's just the fact.
Rick, and following that up, I mean, you take a look at the Abraham Accords. I think are probably the best example of unbelievable progress in the region. Tremendous, but you don't see the Biden administration really building on that. Instead, they're going over to beg the Saudis instead of a phone call to produce more oil. We talked about that on Friday. We had a huge response from our audience on the concerns there. But I look at the way the world is right now, and this reminds me a lot of, and this is, you're younger than me, but it reminds me of Jimmy Carter, and maybe worse, because I think that the lethality of things are worse, and the politics of the moment are worse. But it feels like a flashback to 1977, where if you were working, as I was, as a federal government lawyer in the Department of the Treasury, we couldn't have our heat in the building over 67 or 68 degrees. I had to get, my wife was teaching school, and I would take excess paper that we had, and they would use it on the other side to make copies for the students. And it's like not getting baby formula. I mean, this is absurd on what has happened. And I think, and then you have, on top of that, now you've got the January 6th committee launching into, let's change the Electoral College. So we could really rig the system by changing the Electoral College. And I think this is just, it shows you how desperate they are, knowing what's coming up in November. They know this is going to be a red wave, House, probably the Senate, and then Joe Biden is lame duck for the next 2 years.
Your Jimmy Carter analogies sound like current day California.
Yeah.
I mean, we literally don't have enough electricity and water, and the state is running commercials saying conserve, conserve, conserve. We live on the ocean. We shouldn't have a water problem in California. This is total mismanagement. And yet what we've seen constantly is the left completely taking us to a woke state, even farther left, where we're asking Venezuela and Iran and others. And by the way, we should talk about the fact that the Saudi trip just got postponed, the Saudi and Israel trip.
What do you read into that, Rick? What do you read into that, Rick? What do you read into that it got canceled, postponed?
The Saudis absolutely don't want Joe Biden coming. He made them a pariah state. Remember, one of the first things that the acting DNI did, the DNI, Avril Haines, what she did when she came into office, is repackage the Khashoggi intel to stick it in the eye of the Saudis. When we were trying to move on we made the lessons very clear to the Saudis. We sent strong messages to them to say, this is terrible. This should never happen again. We were moving on to grow the relationship, yet they repackaged the intel in order to send a message to Iran that they knew how to be tough on the Saudis. It's a really terrible manipulation of intelligence.
There's one that, maybe hasn't gotten as much attention, but also the Summit of the Americas, which happened in Los Angeles this week. And the Mexican president just announced he's not going. He's having a public spat. And it's just unique that they had to try and convince the Brazilian president to come. He hasn't even spoken to President Biden yet. They are having trouble getting, again, countries that are not, the leaders. These are not the Chinas of the world, the Russia of the world, but they're important to the United States, our relationship. Of course, they're right on our border. And the country right on our border, not even showing up this week. He's going to send someone else from his government, but it's a big message. It just shows you. It's kind of like the Saudi Arabia thing, Rick. They don't even want to show up because they think that there's no reason to.
Yeah, you look at Mexico, you look at Saudi Arabia. We've got to be talking about these issues because those newsrooms in Washington, D.C. are scrambling today to hide the ball. Yeah. They do not want anyone to know that Joe Biden on the world stage is humiliated and being mocked. I can tell you from Eastern Europe to the Balkans, people absolutely are embarrassed that the United States is led by Joe Biden.